Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzchak Reuven speaking to you from just east of Jerusalem, here in the land of Israel. Today is the 9th day of the month of Shevat, 5782. It's January 11th, 2022. This coming Shabbat, we read Parashat Beshalach, beginning Exodus chapter 13, verse 17, and concluding chapter 17, verse 16. Yes, this is the parasha, this is the week that we actually leave Egypt. High fives all around. We're out of Egypt. Everything is just going to be, smooth and easy and sweet and all good from now on. We learned very quickly that things aren't easy or smooth, but the future is bright. And we're going to be talking about Beshalach in just a moment. This coming Sunday evening, Monday, is Tu B'Shvat, the 15th day of this month of Shvat. The word Tu in this name of Tu B'Shvat is from the two Hebrew letters Tet and Vav. Tet has a numerical value of 9, and Vav has a numerical value of 6. Added up together, you get 15. So it's Tu B'Shvat, the 15th of the month of Shvat. And what is the 15th of Shvat? It's the new year for trees. Yes, the Hebrew calendar has 4 new years. We've been over this many times. I'm not going to spend much time on it now. There is the new year that begins in the first of the month of Nisan, the month of our exodus from Egypt, which we're discussing this week in our Parsha. The other is the first of the 7th month of Tishrei, which is Rosh Hashanah. And there is a new year for the animal, the livestock. And there's a new year for trees. Why is there a new year for livestock and trees? It all has to do with the offerings and tithes, maaser, that we bring to the temple to know where to date the fruit from. Is it a new fruit from this year, or is it from last year? When did it become ripe? When, in what season is it eligible to be brought as an offering? The same with animals. Where do we mark the year and vis-a-vis the age of the animal and the holy temple? Now, we haven't been making offerings for some time now, 2,000 years, but Tu B'Shvat is still celebrated here all over the world, and especially in Israel, where it's become it's gone through a whole revitalization the past century with the return of Jews en masse to Israel, and with the return of Jewish agriculture to Israel. Where one of the first things that many of the pioneers did toward the end of the 19th century, early 20th century and on, was to not only to plow and plant fields for grain and produce, but also to plant trees also for produce, but also trees just to rescue the landscape, rescue the land, to prevent it from further eroding. After 2,000 years of limited Jewish presence, I'm not going to say no, because there were times there were a number of Jews, but no Jewish sovereignty in the land, and it suffered much neglect. And actually, the Romans, in their wars against the Jews in the land of Israel, they used trees for their military weaponry, so they would cut down trees, and they also used trees, as we all know, for crucifying people. And many thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of people were crucified in those Roman times. That was the method of punishment for what the Romans considered to be serious crimes. And so between that and the war efforts, the land was denuded all the way back then, and it never revived. And once the land is wasted like that, it's hard to grow back. And when you're grazing sheep and goats, they tend to eat what's growing close to the land. So it's difficult once the land has been denuded and begins to wear away and to rocky rocky cliffs and fields. It's tough to for the flora to return. So a special effort was made. Millions and millions, literally millions of trees have been planted in Israel over the past century. In fact, Israel is the only nation on earth that has more trees today than it did 100 years ago. Because as we know, as man grows and expands, he's constantly clearing forests and hence less and less trees. But here in Israel, because of this effort, there are many more trees today than there were. And likewise, even among, maybe even I should say, especially among secular pioneers, and many of the pioneers that came back to Israel from Europe for the Zionist cause, to reclaim the land and to create a nation here in Israel. Many of them were secular, but they adopted Tu B'Shvat in order to celebrate agriculture. And so they'd be beautiful. To this day, it still exists on certain kibbutzim. Kibbutzim are, of course, agricultural collectives where sort of like a socialist endeavor where the land was shared, property was shared. And that's how many of the early agricultural efforts in modern Israel began. And so they would have elaborate, festive Tu B'Shvats with tractors and wagons loaded with the produce, and loaded with fruit, and loaded with wheat, barley, etc., etc. So it's a very popular holiday today, as well as eating fruits. We eat fruits, make blessings, and eat fruits of the land. Some people eat dried fruits because not all the fruits of the 7 species, we talked about this last week, are not ripe at this time of the year. And of course, there's even a mystical, Kabbalistic ceremony, a Seder. We call it like the Seder that we have, similar to the Seder we have in Passover, which was developed by a Kabbalist from the 16th century in the Israeli northern city of Sfat, spelled in English S-A-F-E-D, I guess pronounced Safed, but in Hebrew it's Tzfat. So it's a big holiday. Speaking of which, we're speaking of food, nourishment, plenty. This week in the Parsha, we're going to be getting to it, but I want to mention it now, is the whole subject, the introduction of the manna. In Hebrew, it's man, because the people looked and said, manhu, meaning, what is it? They didn't understand. Of course they didn't understand. It was literally bread from heaven that God would place on the ground to welcome the Israelites as they awoke every morning. And so the entire description of the man begins in this week's reading after Israel's crossed the Sea of Reeds. Don't worry, we're going to get back to that in a minute. After the people they're hungry, they're thirsty, their provisions have run out. They had enough on their backs. Remember, they left Egypt, they left with food that they carried on their backs, and now it's run out, and they're hungry, and they're complaining, and rightfully so. Sometimes, we feel a little bit indignant. How can they complain? God just rescued them. Everything's going to be okay. Don't they know that? But they were hungry. I think when you're hungry and you don't know where the food's going to come from, it's a little bit scary. So they're complaining. And God tells Moshe that beginning the next day, he is going to be blessing the nation with manna every morning. And the people will wake up and they'll see it and they'll collect it, and they'll collect enough for their household, and not any more and not any less. Everybody should have enough, but no excess. And anything that's left over to the next day will get wormy and rot and smell and be disgusting. And on Friday, they'll get a double portion of this manna because it will carry over to Shabbat, The man that appears on Friday is man that will last 2 days. Nothing will go bad on Shabbat. It won't rot, it won't get worms, so that people will have food for the entire Shabbat. And with this introduction of the manna, which begins in chapter 16, when Hashem says, verse 4, Hashem said to Moshe, "Behold, I shall rain down for you food from heaven." Wow. Let the people go out and pick each day's portion on its day, so that I can test them, whether they will follow my teaching or not. And so shall it be that on the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring, it will be double what they pick every day. So God's testing the people. Well, he's blessing the people. He's giving them food, sustenance, which is going to last for the entire 40 years. They're going to get manna every morning. What's the test? The test is that they won't hoard it. The test is that they'll take what they need and not more. And the test is that on Shabbat, they won't try to find more, because there won't be any more. They won't go out searching for it. It won't be there. They'll have plenty from Friday for Shabbat. So this is how Hashem is teaching us how to earn a living, how to provide. Now Hashem is giving them the manna, but actually everything that we earn, all the sustenance we get from the work of our hands, from our hard work, whether it's handwork or mind work, however hard we work for it, it's a blessing from Hashem, and we have to always recognize that, and we have to always be appreciative of what we have and what we earn. And of course, we strive to earn more if we don't feel we're earning enough. But there's a difference between striving for more on a healthy basis than not appreciating what we have, and certainly knowing that there's a day of rest. There's a day of rest in the world, and we don't work on that day. Even though we may think, well, if I work on that day, I'll earn more, I'll have more. We don't work on that day. So God is testing Israel in the story here. He's testing Israel that are they going to listen to Hashem? This is really the first test. God has been doing them, good deed after good deed. Gets them out of Egypt, gets them across the Sea of Reeds. They're hungry, thirsty, there's food, there's water, they're complaining. It's not pleasant, but Hashem is giving them all they need. But in return, Hashem has to know that Israel will abide by Hashem's words, because the whole point of the Exodus is to develop a relationship between Hashem and his people. It's not just to get these people out of slavery. It's not just to get them out of physical slavery. It's also to get them out of spiritual bondage, and also emotional, mental slavery. The people keep complaining all throughout. We're going to be reading every now and again. They're going to say, why don't we just go back to Egypt? It was so much better. Then they forget so quickly that they were slaves. But when you're a slave, when you're not in control of your life, but certain things are guaranteed, not for your own good, but for someone else's benefit, as in food, a place to sleep so that you'll be able to work the next day, you have certain guarantees. So yeah, we can sell ourselves and have a certain guarantee in life, or we can leave all that and really pursue freedom, physical freedom, spiritual freedom. And that's what Hashem wants Israel to pursue. So if Hashem presents this, it was a test. And yes, there were some people who tried to keep what they took one day overnight for the next day, for a midnight snack or something, and it rotted. And there were people who went looking for it on Shabbat, even though it was explicit that you were not supposed to. Human nature. This is the generation of the desert, generation of the wilderness. They're also known as a generation of knowledge. And that, of course, is because they had such a close relationship with Hashem. For all their misdeeds, which we're going to be reading about, they were at Mount Sinai. They crossed the Sea of Reeds. They heard God's voice. They saw God's glory. Nothing like it. An amazing generation. They reached heights that we can only dream of, and they also reach depths that we have to be careful never to go there. So there's so much takes place in Parashat Beshalach, which means and he sent. So much takes place. I would love to have 3 or 4 Temple Talk shows to talk about it all, but alas, we only have this week because next week is already another exciting, very exciting parsha. So Beshalach, this is how it begins on chapter 17 in the book of Exodus, chapter 13, verse 17. Hebrew, then English, Vayhi Beshalach Paro et ha'am v'lo naham Elokim derech eretz plishtim ki karov hu ki amar Elokim pen inahem ha'am bir'otam milachama v'shavu mitzrayma vayasev Elokim et ha'am derech hamidbar yamsuf v'chamushim alu v'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. It happened when Pharaoh sent out the people that God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, because it was near. For God said, perhaps the people will reconsider when they see a war, and they will return to Egypt. So God turned the people toward the way of the wilderness to the Sea of Reeds. The children of Israel were armed when they went up from the land of Israel. Moshe took the bones of Yosef with him, for he had firmly adjured the children of Israel, saying, God will surely remember you, and ye shall bring up my bones from here with you. Of course, we recall that Yosef, way back toward the concluding verses of the book of Genesis, said to his brothers, I'm about to die, and God will certainly visit you and get you out of this land. And when you do, take my bones and have them buried in the land of Israel. So Moshe took it upon himself to get those bones before they left. Those bones were actually, according to legend, according to Midrash, were buried in the Nile River in a casket. And Moshe needed to determine exactly where they were so he could fetch them and bring them out. So the children leave. It's so interesting, last week, conclusion of the 10 plagues, and the last plague, of course, the death of the firstborn children in every household in Egypt and firstborn of all the livestock. That plague that broke the camel's back, the plague that broke Pharaoh's will, and he said, go, leave, get out of here. And he also said, put in a good word for me, but he said, get out of here. So it's so interesting. And it's the same time as Hashem was dealing this blow, which finally made it, there was, what more could happen? Yeah, Pharaoh had to say leave. Pharaoh told Israel to leave. At the same time, Israel did what Hashem asked. They each household took a lamb. They slaughtered the lamb on the 14th, prepared a meal, got ready to leave. They went to their neighbors and their neighbors and gave them many precious things, metals and fabrics, as Hashem said they would. But the slaughter of the lamb was really an abomination for the Egyptians because the lamb was a sacred animal. So Israel did something which meant that it was no going back. They crossed the Rubicon, as we say, no going back. Once they did that, they couldn't stay in Egypt. So they made themselves vile in the eyes, in the hearts of the Egyptians. So they had to leave. And at the same time, Hashem made it so Pharaoh had to send them out. What did they leave, or were they sent out? Did they leave, we're out of here, we're getting out of here, or were they sent out? And if I don't know if there's a single answer here. It's very fascinating. I think that it's not a clean cut story here. It's not a fairy tale. There's all these different levels and layers and interpretations. They got out, and the Yad Ramah, they came out, with a mighty hand. They left. They marched out. They left out proud. But there was a lot going on, a lot of background, a lot happening. So when they leave, of course, after we read here, after they leave, then Pharaoh says, what did I do? I just sent out my entire workforce. What am I going to do tomorrow? So he chases after him with his entire army. And then, of course, we all know the story. Israel, on the seventh day after leaving Egypt, which is actually the seventh day of the Passover holiday, which so that seventh day of the Passover holiday, which is also a holy day, we don't do any work on it, is actually the day commemorating the crossing of the Sea of Reeds, Yam Suf, often mistranslated as the Red Sea, but it's Yam Suf. A suf is a reed, and it was a sea of reeds because there were reeds at the edge of this body of water, just like the reeds that were used to make the basket that Moshe was found in when he was floating in the reeds of the Nile River. But this is the Yam Suf, and the people arrive at Yam Suf, and the Egyptian army catches up with them. And of course, here's the famous incident where they turn to Moshe and say, thanks a lot. There weren't enough graves in Egypt for us to be buried. You have to take us out here to the deserts to bury us. I've heard it said that this is the birth of Jewish humor. Jews are known to be humorous, a lot of Jewish comedians, and a lot of the humor is sort of sarcastic, and this certainly was very sarcastic. They weren't in a joking mood. And again, that seems so ungrateful. Moshe led them out, Hashem brought them out, and you're just going to turn around and say, thanks a lot, thanks for nothing. But what do we want from what they didn't see a way out here? As far as they're concerned, there's a most powerful army behind them. Now it says they left out. We read in that second verse, that they were hamushim when they left out, and in English they were armed when they left. So they brought weapons, but their weapons were certainly no match for this amazing army, chariots, horsemen of Pharaoh. And in front of them was this sea, this body of water. They were trapped. The jig is up, it's over. So what do? They call out to Moshe. They say, why, thanks a lot. We're all going to die. And Moshe, of course, calls to Hashem. And Hashem says, why are you crying out to me? Hold up the mateh, hold up your staff, and move. Okay, so there are many midrashim, ancient Jewish legends, explanations, understandings, interpretations about what's really happening here. And some say that the nation basically divided into four different groups. One group said, well, let's just fight. Well, we'll fight to the last man. We know it's suicide, but we'll put up a fight. Another group said, let's just, hold up our arms and go back to slavery. It was all a bad dream. And another said, let's just, jump into the sea and see if we can, we'll just drown in the sea. Nobody really had, what are you going to do? What was the solution? And then there's, of course, the famous midrash that one man, Nachshon, ben Aminadav, son of Aminadav from the tribe of Judah, that he just started walking into the Sea of Reeds, and he just said, I'm going to do this. I don't care. I'm out of here. And when he got up to his nostrils where he's going to drown in a moment, that's when Hashem opened up the sea. And of course, the underlying meaning of that is that you got to push forward and trust in Hashem. And when Hashem sees that you have that faith, you have that trust, and you're moving and working and you're moving on that faith, you're not waiting for a miracle. You're pursuing a miracle, let's say. That's when that magic happens. And your will and God's will merge. And so he's walking into the water, and God says, this is a man who's determined, and God opens up the sea on Nachshon's behalf. Now, of course, that is midrash. In the story as it's related in our text in the Torah, Moshe raises his staff, and a east wind comes and blows all night and creates this path of dry land, splitting the sea. And there are even midrashim that say there was a separate path with a wall of water in between each path, 12 separate paths, each for the 12 tribes. And I think it was just to, why 12 paths? Just to magnify the miracle. This is a miracle that happened in front of everybody's eyes, both the Israelites and the Egyptians. It is considered the miracle par excellence of history. It just happened. There was no. It wasn't. Today the theories maybe there had been an earthquake and there was a tsunami and all sorts. Maybe, who knows? But even if there was some kind of, if you want to go by some kind of natural phenomenon which created this miracle, the timing of that natural phenomenon itself was miraculous. So the sea opens up, Israel crosses across the sea, begins to sing that wonderful song of the sea, Shirat Hayam, Song of the Sea, chapter 15. Then Moshe and the children of Israel chose to sing this song to Hashem, and they said the following: I shall sing to Hashem, for he is exalted above the arrogant, having hurled a horse with its rider into the sea. The might and vengeance of God was salvation for me. This is my God, and I will build him a sanctuary, the God of my father, and I will exalt him. Hashem is master of war. His name is Hashem, etc., etc. The beautiful, beautiful song, which actually is incorporated into our daily prayer. We say it every morning. This beautiful song of out and out praise for Hashem, and also a song of our commitments to be Hashem's people. And they sing this song after they've crossed the sea and see that the Egyptians have pursued them. God says to Moshe, raise up your staff again. He does, and the sea closes in on the Egyptians, drowning the entire army. And that was that. They're on the other side. So many times in life we come to an impasse. We don't know how to move forward. There's a Yam Suf in front of us. There's a sea of reeds. And life is pursuing us. We can't stand still. We have to move forward. There are moments in life that are very tough. They take tremendous faith, tremendous courage, and action. We have to move forward. And sometimes that Yam Suf, that Yam Suf is just going to open up like a mirage. It's just going to disappear, and we're going to be able to get to the other side and move forward and put that past behind. This was it. Israel was on the other side now. They're not going to see Egypt again. Yes, as I said before, there'll be times when they'll be longing to go back to Egypt. Again, times are tough, and they don't always have that faith or that courage to keep moving forward when the clouds, the dark clouds, start to accumulate again and things look tough. But we need that. So here was a moment in history where Israel's it took them a minute. They were scared. They didn't know what to do, and they, again, in the Nachshon Midrash, Israel, in the form of Nachshon, an individual, was the one who initiated. He started walking into sea, and God responded. Of course, here, God splits open the sea, and Israel says, we get it, and they start marching forward. But again, Israel, a moment before, was crying out to Hashem and complaining. But you have to speak up. You have to speak up, and you have to act, and you have to move forward. So Israel's on the other side. And, again, we're at this point where you figure, okay, everybody can take a breath. Everybody can relax. Let their clothes dry. Wash their clothes. They've been walking for 7 days. But no. They got to march on. And no sooner are they over the other side of the Sea of Reeds than they're thirsty and they're hungry and they're complaining. And Moshe, already a week into this adventure, is having a hard time. And as you all know, this is just the introduction to Israel's 40 years in the wilderness. Now, of course, at this point, there was no intention for it to be 40 years. It was going to be a single year in the wilderness, and then right into the land of Canaan, even though at the very beginning we saw that God diverted the natural path. They could have more quickly entered the land, but they would have had to go to war against the Philistines, the Plishtim, who were a very difficult, militant population, and they would have run from that, but they just weren't prepared. Now, it's interesting. They did leave with some kind of weaponry, we read. I mentioned a few weeks ago, I've been reading Josephus, the 1st century CE Jewish military man, intellect, and Kohen, who led an Israelite, however you want to call it, a Judean army against Egypt in the revolt of 70, and then was captured by the Romans and sided with the Romans. And he, in telling the story of the Sea of Reeds, he says that after the Egyptian army drowned in the Sea of Reeds, their weaponry washed up on shore, and Israel was able to collect that. So now they're more well-armed. They're very interesting. He was a military man, and I don't know if he this was his own inspiration, or if this was a common understanding that was going around in those days. It's not part of, I don't think, I've never read this in any midrash, but Josephus says it. And of course, very soon, they're going to need that weaponry, because as our parsha ends, they are beset upon by Amalek. No reason in the world. They're minding their own business, and Amalek just says, let's see what we can get from these people. So they ambush them, and a big battle opens up. And of course, that's when Moshe goes up on a hilltop, raises up his arms, and when he raises his arms, the people are encouraged. He's raising his arms toward heaven, and the people, their faith is restored, and they fight more strongly, and they end up victorious in the fight against Amalek. Oh, there's the music. Wow, so much more to say. And I said it was a very interesting parasha. You have to read it on your own, people, and think about that man. It's a very important lesson that we learn about the manna. Thanks for being with me, and we'll talk.